Commander Veltar Koss pressed his back against the cold metal wall of the defense bunker and closed his eyes for just a moment. The pain in his left arm, where the acid had burned through his armor 3 days ago, was getting worse. Dr. Lyra. Venth had done what she could with the medicine they had left, but there was not much of anything left anymore. Outside the bunker, the sounds of energy weapons firing had become a constant noise that never stopped. His soldiers were shooting at the insect creatures that kept coming and coming like waves in an ocean. The Zephyrians had been attacking their colony for 6 months now, and Koss knew they could not hold out much longer. He opened his eyes and looked at the display screen that showed him what was happening outside. Hundreds of the bug-like aliens were moving across the burned ground toward their walls. Their shells were dark green and covered in spikes, and they walked on 6 legs that made clicking sounds on the rocks. Behind them, the massive bioships floated in the air like living mountains, shooting streams of acid that could melt through almost anything. "Commander," called out Lieutenant Nexara from across the bunker, "we are down to 40% power on the main shields. If they fail, the acid will get through to the civilian shelters." Koss nodded and walked over to the control station. On the screen, he could see the numbers that told him everything he did not want to know. They had enough energy for maybe 12 more hours if they were lucky. Their ammunition was almost gone. Half of his soldiers were wounded or dead, and the enemy had more ships coming every day. "How many people are still in the upper levels?" he asked. "About 15,000, Nexara replied. "Elder Morak Thel is trying to move them down to the mining tunnels, but it takes time." The mining tunnels were deep underground where the colonists had been digging for rare metals before the war started. The tunnels might protect people from the acid for a while, but there was not enough food or water down there for 40,000 people. It would just be a slower way to die. Dr. Lyra Venth came into the bunker carrying her medical bag. She looked tired and sad, like all of them did now. Her blue skin was pale, and her large eyes had dark circles under them. She had been working, without sleep for days to help the wounded. "How are the injured?" Koss asked her. "I lost 3 more today," she said quietly. "I cannot do much without proper medicine. The acid burns are too deep, and the infection is spreading." Lyra sat down heavily in a chair and put her head in her hands. She was the best doctor on the colony, but even she could not work miracles with empty shelves and broken equipment. "Have we heard anything from the distress beacon?" Koss asked. "Nothing," Nexara said. "We have been sending the same message for 23 days. Either no one is listening, or no one cares about a small mining colony." The distress beacon was their last hope. It was a powerful transmitter that could send messages across many star systems, asking for help from anyone who might hear it. But space was big, and there were not many ships that traveled through this part of the galaxy. Elder Morak Thel came into the bunker looking even more tired than Dr. Venth. He was old for a Kelthani, with gray spots on his blue skin and hands. That shook when he was nervous. He had been in charge of the colony for 20 years, watching it grow from a small outpost to a thriving community. Now he was watching it die. "Commander," he said, "I have been thinking about what we discussed yesterday." Koss knew what the elder meant. They had talked about surrender, about trying to negotiate with the Zephyrians to save at least some of the civilians. It was not something any of them wanted to think about, but when all the other choices were gone, even bad choices started to look reasonable. "The Zephyrians do not take prisoners," Koss said. "You know this." "But maybe if we offered to give them the mining equipment, the processed metals, everything we have built here," Thel said, "maybe they would let the children leave." Dr. Venth looked up from her hands. "The children deserve a chance to live," she said softly. Koss understood how they felt. He felt the same way, but he also knew that the Zephyrians had never shown mercy to anyone. On every other world they had attacked, they had killed everything that moved and taken everything that was useful. They were like a swarm of insects that ate everything in their path. "I will not give the order to surrender," he said. "Not while we still have power and ammunition." A loud explosion shook the bunker, and dust fell from the ceiling. Through the thick walls they could hear the sound of their automated defense guns firing faster and faster. The enemy was getting closer. "Sir," Nexara called out, "the eastern shield generator just went offline. We are down to 3 generators now." Koss walked back to the display screen and saw that a large section of their defensive wall was now unprotected. The Zephyrians would see this weakness quickly and focus their attack there. His soldiers would have to move to cover that area with their personal weapons, but they did not have enough people left to cover such a big gap. "Move the reserve team to the eastern wall," he ordered, "and tell them to make every shot count." As Nexara sent the orders, Koss looked out through the small window at the dark sky. Somewhere up there, past the enemy ships and the smoke and the acid clouds, were the stars where other civilizations lived their lives in peace. He wondered if any of them even knew that the Kelthani people existed, or if they would care when the last of them died. The window suddenly lit up with a bright flash as another bioship came down from orbit. This one was bigger than the others, with weapon pods along its sides that were already glowing with deadly energy. Koss counted the ships he could see and realized there were now more enemy vessels than ever before. "They are preparing for the final attack," he said to the others, in the bunker. "This will be their last push to break through our defenses." Dr. Vent stood up and picked up her medical bag. "Then I should go to the medical center and prepare for more wounded." Elder Thel also stood up, but he moved slowly like an old man who was carrying a heavy weight. "I will help move the last of the civilians to the tunnels. If this is the end, at least we can try to give them a few more hours." As they prepared to leave the bunker, another explosion shook the building. This time, pieces of concrete fell from the ceiling and the lights flickered. Through the wall, they could hear the sound of their enemies getting closer and closer. Koss checked his weapon one more time and looked at his people. They had fought well and longer than anyone had expected. When the history of the Kelthani people was written, if anyone was left to write it, they would remember that the colonists of Keth-Ara had not given up without a fight. Outside, the sky was turning black as hundreds of bioships moved into position for the attack that would end everything. 3 days before the final attack on Keth-Ara, Colonel Jake Morrison was drinking his morning coffee in the command center of the UES Defiance when Corporal Lisa Hayes came running across the room with a piece of paper in her hand. "Colonel, we picked up something on the long-range communications," she said, breathing hard from running. "It's a distress signal from a system about 2 days away." Morrison set down his coffee cup and took the paper from her. He was a big man with gray hair and scars on his hands from 20 years of military service. He had seen a lot of battles and lost a lot of good soldiers, but he had never heard anything quite like what was written on that paper. "This is from aliens?" he asked. "Yes, sir." The computer translated it. "They're asking for help against something called the Zephyrian Empire. Says they're the last survivors of their species on that planet." Morrison read the message again. It was simple and desperate. The aliens said they were trapped in a colony, surrounded by enemies, and running out of time. They had been broadcasting the same message for weeks, hoping someone would hear it and come to help them. Have we ever heard of these Zephyrians before? Morrison asked. No, sir. But from what the message says, they sound like bad news. The aliens say the Zephyrians destroyed every other settlement on their planet and killed millions of people. Morrison walked over to the star chart on the wall and found the system where the signal was coming from. It was not far away, but it was not on any of their planned routes either. The Defiance was supposed to be conducting a routine patrol mission, looking for pirates and checking on human colonies in the outer systems. Get me Captain Rodriguez and Sergeant Collins, he said, and tell them to bring the tactical reports on our drop capabilities. 20 minutes later, Morrison was sitting in the briefing room with his top officers. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez was his best pilot and the leader of the drop pod squadron. She was young but smart, and she had never lost a Marine during a combat drop. Sergeant Pete Collins was older, with gray in his beard and enough explosives, knowledge to level a small city. Both of them were looking at the translated alien message with serious expressions. So what do you think? Morrison asked them. It's not our fight, Rodriguez said. We don't know these aliens, and we don't know what we'd be getting into. But they're asking for help, Collins said. And it sounds like they're about to be wiped. Out, Morrison nodded. He had been thinking the same thing. The message made it clear that the aliens were civilians, not soldiers. They were just people trying to survive against an enemy that wanted to kill them all. How long would it take to get there? He asked Rodriguez. 2 days at maximum burn. But, Colonel, we only have 200 Marines on board. If this Zephyrian Empire is as dangerous as the message makes them sound, we might not be enough to make a difference. Sometimes 200 Marines is all you need, Morrison said, especially if you drop them in the right place at the right time. Collins was studying the star charts and making notes on a piece of paper. If we're going to do this, we need to go fast. That message is 3 days old already. By the time we get there, it might be too late. Morrison stood up and walked to the window that looked out into space. Out there, somewhere among all those stars, were people who were going to die if no one helped them. They were not human people, but that did not seem to matter. They were people, and they needed help. Get me a secure line to Fleet Command, he said. An hour later, Morrison was talking to Admiral Sarah Williams back on Earth. She was not happy about his request to change their mission and go help aliens that no one had ever heard of before. Jake, you're talking about risking 200 Marines and a starship to help people we know nothing about, she said through the communication screen. What if it's a trap? What if these aliens are the bad guys and they're lying about being attacked? Admiral, I've read their message 20 times. These people are scared and desperate. They're not trying to trick anyone. They're just trying to stay alive. And what about the Zephyrians? We don't know anything about their military capabilities or their technology. You could be flying into a battle you can't win. Morrison had been thinking about that too, but he had also been thinking about something else. Admiral, what if we were the ones sending that distress signal? What if it was a human colony that was about to be destroyed and some alien ship picked up our message? Wouldn't we want them to at least try to help? There was a long silence on the communication line. Admiral Williams was a good officer and a good person, but she also had to think about the safety of human ships and human lives. You have 48 hours, she finally said. If you can get there and assess the situation in that time, you're authorized to provide limited assistance. But if it looks like a trap, or if you're outnumbered too badly, you get out of there immediately. Understood, Admiral. Thank you. Morrison cut the communication and walked back to the command center where Hayes was waiting with more information about the alien signal. Colonel, we've been analyzing the message more carefully. The aliens call themselves Kelthani, and their colony is called Cathara. From what we can tell, they're a peaceful species that was mining metals when the Zephyrians attacked them. What about the Zephyrians? Any more information about them? Not much. But there are references to bioships and acid weapons. It sounds like they use living technology instead of metal ships like we do. Morrison thought about that. Fighting against alien technology was always challenging because you never knew what to expect. But Marines were trained to adapt to any situation, and they had weapons and tactics that had been proven in dozens of different battles. "Tell all squad leaders to report to the armory in 1 hour," he said. "We're going to war." The next day, as the Defiance traveled through space toward the Kelthani system, Morrison walked through the ship talking to his Marines. They were cleaning their weapons, checking their armor, and preparing their drop pods for what might be the strangest battle any of them had ever fought. "Hey, Colonel," called out Corporal Danny Kim from where he was working on his rifle. "Is it true we're going to fight bug aliens?" "Something like that," Morrison said. "The important thing is that we're going to help people who need help. That's what Marines do." "Even if they're not human people?" asked Private Jenny Walsh. "Especially. Then," Morrison said, "anyone can help their own kind. It takes something special to help strangers." In the drop pod bay, Rodriguez was running final checks on all the equipment. The pods were designed to carry Marines from orbit down to a planet's surface in just a few minutes. They were tough enough to survive enemy fire and fast enough to get through most defensive systems. "How many pods are we taking?" Morrison asked her. "All of them. 200 pods for 200 Marines. If we're going to do this, we might as well do it right." Collins came over carrying a box of special ammunition. "I've been reading about alien biology. These Zephyrians might have armor that's different from anything we've seen before. I want everyone to have rounds that can punch through just about anything." Morrison nodded. They were going into this mission with almost no information about their enemy. But that was not unusual for Marines. They were trained to figure things out as they went and adapt their tactics to whatever they found. "How long until we reach the system?" Morrison asked. 18 hours, Rodriguez said. "We should be able to see what's happening there long before we arrive." Morrison looked around at his Marines. They were good people, brave people who had volunteered to risk their lives for strangers they had never met. In 18 hours, they would either save a dying civilization or die trying. Outside the ship, the stars moved past as the Defiance raced toward a battle that would change everything. The drop pods fell through the atmosphere of Velos Prime like burning meteors, their heat shields glowing white-hot as they cut through the thick air. Inside pod number 47, Corporal Lisa Hayes was checking her equipment one last time, while the pod shook and rattled around her. 30 seconds to impact," she said into her radio. "All squads report ready." Through her small window, she could see the ground getting closer fast. Below them was a scene of destruction that made her stomach turn. The alien colony was surrounded by huge ships that looked like they were made of living tissue instead of metal. Green and brown creatures were crawling across the ground in massive numbers, heading toward walls that were cracking and breaking under constant attack. "I see the landing zone," called out Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez from her lead pod. "There's a clear area between the enemy and the colony walls. We're going right into the middle of it." Hayes felt the pod's retro rockets fire as it slowed down for landing. The impact was hard, but not dangerous, and she was out of the pod with her rifle ready before the dust had even settled. All around her, other Marines were doing the same thing, forming defensive positions and looking for targets. The first thing that hit her was the smell. The air was thick with the scent of acid and burning metal, and something else that smelled like rotting meat. The second thing she noticed was the size of the enemy forces. There were thousands of the insect creatures moving toward them, and they all had sharp claws and teeth that looked designed for killing. "Contact front," shouted Sergeant Pete Collins from about 50 meters away. "Lots of contact front." Hayes raised her rifle and aimed at the nearest group of aliens. They were about the size of large dogs, but walked on 6 legs and had shells that looked thick and hard. When she pulled the trigger, her specially designed bullets punched right through their armor and dropped them where they stood. The ammo. "Works!" she called out on the radio. "Standard rounds are effective against their armor." All around the landing zone, 200 Marines were setting up a defensive perimeter and engaging enemy forces that had never seen anything like human weapons before. The Zephyrians had been expecting to fight the same Kelthani defenders they had been wearing down for months. Instead, they suddenly found themselves facing a completely different kind of enemy with different tactics and different technology. Colonel Jake Morrison landed hard and rolled out of his pod with his command radio already in his hand. "All squads, sound off," he ordered. "I want casualty reports and ammunition status." "Squad 1, no casualties. Ammunition green," came Rodriguez's voice. "Squad 2, 1 minor injury, ammunition green," reported Collins. One by one, all 20 squad leaders checked in. Somehow, they had managed to land 200 Marines in the middle of a battle zone without losing a single person. It was the kind of perfect insertion that Marines dreamed about, but rarely got in real combat. Morrison looked around at the battlefield and started making tactical decisions. The Kelthani colony was about a kilometer away, behind walls that were glowing, with some kind of energy shield. Between the Marines and the colony, thousands of Zephyrian warriors were advancing in organized groups. Behind the warriors, huge bioships were floating in the air and shooting streams of acid at the defensive walls. "Hayes, get me communication with the defenders," Morrison ordered. "I need to talk to whoever is in charge over there." Hayes pulled out her universal translator and started scanning for radio signals. The device was designed to pick up alien communications and convert them into English using pattern recognition and basic mathematics. After a few seconds, she found a signal and started working on the translation. "Got something, Colonel," she said. "Sounds like military communications, trying to establish contact now." Inside the Kelthani command bunker, Commander Veltar Koss was staring at his display screens in complete confusion. His sensors were showing him 200 small objects that had fallen from the sky right into the middle of the battle. Now, those objects were shooting at the Zephyrians with weapons that seemed much more effective than anything the Kelthani had. "Sir," Lieutenant Nexara called out, "we're receiving a communication on an open frequency. It's not from the Zephyrians." "Put it through," Koss ordered. A voice came through the speakers, speaking words that the computer slowly translated into Kelthani language. "This is Colonel Jake Morrison of the Terran Marine Corps. We received your distress signal and we're here to help. Can you identify your command structure?" Koss stood there for a moment, trying to understand what he was hearing. Terran Marine Corps. That meant the voice belonged to one of the creatures that had just landed in the middle of the battle. They were not Kelthani, and they were not Zephyrian. They were something else entirely, and they said they were here to help. "This is Commander Veltar Koss of the Kethara Defense Force," he said into his communicator. "Are you saying that you came here to fight for us?" "That's exactly what I'm saying, Commander. We're Marines. Fighting for people who need help is what we do." "Can you give me tactical information about enemy positions and capabilities?" Dr. Lyra Venth was standing next to Koss, and she could barely believe what she was hearing. "Someone actually heard our message," she whispered. Someone came to help us. Outside, the battle was changing rapidly. The Zephyrian warriors, who had been advancing confidently toward the colony walls, were now confused and disorganized. They were used to fighting enemies who used energy weapons and defensive tactics. The human Marines were using kinetic weapons that punched through Zephyrian armor like it was made of paper, and they were using aggressive tactics that the aliens had never seen before. Lieutenant Rodriguez was leading her squad in a flanking maneuver against a group of bioships that had landed to discharge more warriors. "Collins, can you get some explosives on those ships?" she called out. "Already on it," Collins replied. He was running toward the nearest bioship with a pack full of demolition charges. The ship's defensive systems tried to stop him with streams of acid, but Collins was too fast and too experienced. He slapped charges onto what looked like the ship's weak points and ran for cover. When the explosives went off, the bioship made a sound like a wounded animal and started leaking green fluid all over the ground. Its weapons stopped firing, and the warriors that had been coming out of it scattered in panic. "That's how you kill a space monster," Collins said with satisfaction. The Zephyrian commanders were realizing that their easy victory had suddenly become a real fight. The arrival of the human Marines had completely changed the tactical situation. Not only were the humans effective fighters, but their presence had given new hope and energy to the Kelthani defenders. From his command bunker, Koss was coordinating with Morrison to set up overlapping fields of fire. The Kelthani energy weapons were good for suppressing large areas, while the human kinetic weapons were better for precision targeting. Together, they were creating a defensive system that was much stronger than either force could manage alone. "Commander Morrison," Koss said into his communicator, "your timing is remarkable. We were preparing for our final stand when you arrived." "Well, Commander, the party's not over yet. I'm seeing a lot more enemy ships up in orbit. This fight is just getting started." Hayes was monitoring Zephyrian communications and trying to understand their command structure. "Colonel, I'm picking up chatter that sounds like they're calling for reinforcements. It sounds like they're surprised and angry." Morrison nodded. That made sense. The Zephyrians had probably been planning to finish off the colony quickly and easily. Instead, they were now facing a two-species alliance that was fighting back with unexpected effectiveness. "All squads, consolidate positions and prepare for counterattack," Morrison ordered. "The enemy is going to try to figure out what just happened, and then they're going to come at us with everything they have." As the sun set over the battlefield, the first day of the alliance between humans and Kelthani came to an end. The immediate crisis was over, but both Morrison and Koss knew that the real test was still to come. Somewhere up in orbit, the Zephyrian fleet was preparing for a response that would determine whether two civilizations would survive or die together. But for the first time in months, the defenders of Kithara went to sleep with hope instead of despair. The morning after the first battle brought an unusual quiet to the colony of Kithara. For the first time in months, the sound of constant weapons fire had stopped. The Zephyrians had pulled back during the night to regroup and plan their next attack, leaving the humans and Kelthani with precious time to prepare. Dr. Sam Chen was walking through the colony's medical center with Dr. Lyra Venth, comparing notes about Zephyrian biology. Chen was a xenobiologist who had volunteered to join the Marine mission specifically to study alien life forms. What he was learning about the enemy was giving him ideas about how to fight them more effectively. "Their exoskeletons are interesting," Chen said, looking at pieces of Zephyrian armor that had been collected from the battlefield. "They're organic compounds, but they're structured more like ceramic than bone. That's why our kinetic rounds work so well against them. Dr. Venth was examining the same pieces with her own medical scanner. What I find fascinating is their neural structure. From what I can see in these tissue samples, they seem to share information in ways that individual creatures should not be able to do. Like a hive mind? Chen asked. Something like that. If we could disrupt their communication somehow, it might confuse their battle coordination. In another part of the colony, Tech Sergeant Dan Murphy was working with Kelthani engineers to upgrade their shield generators. Murphy was an expert at making human and alien technology work together, and he was impressed by how advanced the Kelthani power systems were. "Your fusion reactors are actually more efficient than ours," he told the lead engineer, a quiet Kelthani named Voreth. "If we can modify your shield emitters to use our frequency modulation techniques, we might be able to make them stronger and more stable." Voreth was fascinated by human engineering approaches. "Your people seem to prefer simple solutions that are easy to repair and modify. Our technology is more complex but also more fragile." "Sometimes simple is better," Murphy said, "especially when people are shooting at you." They worked together for hours, combining human practicality with Kelthani sophistication. The result was a shield system that was stronger than either species could have built alone. Captain Maria Santos was flying reconnaissance missions over the planet, mapping enemy positions and looking for weaknesses in their deployment. Her fighter was fast and quiet, and the Zephyrians had not yet figured out how to track it effectively. "Colonel Morrison, this is Santos," she reported over the radio. "I'm seeing massive enemy reinforcements coming down from orbit. It looks like they're bringing in their heavy units." Morrison was in the command bunker with Commander Koss, studying tactical displays and planning defensive positions. The two military leaders had developed a good working relationship despite their species differences. "How heavy are we talking?" "About?" Morrison asked. "Bigger bioships than anything we've seen so far. Some of them are the size of city blocks. And there's something else up there, something huge. It's too far away for me to get good readings, but it's at least 10 times bigger than the largest ship we've seen." Koss looked at Morrison with concern. "That would be a hive ship. We have heard stories about them from other worlds that were attacked. They carry millions of warriors and weapons capable of destroying entire continents." Morrison nodded grimly. He had been expecting something like this. The Zephyrians had been caught off guard by the human intervention, but they were clearly not willing to accept defeat. They were bringing in enough force to overwhelm any possible defense. "How long do we have?" he asked Santos. "The big ships are moving slowly. Maybe 18 hours before they reach attack position." Morrison and Koss looked at each other. 18 hours to prepare for a battle that would determine the fate of everyone on the planet. In the colony's civilian areas, an interesting cultural exchange was taking place. Human Marines were sharing their field rations with Kelthani families, while the aliens were showing the humans their art and music. Despite the language barriers, people from both species were finding ways to communicate and connect. Corporal Lisa Hayes was sitting with a group of Kelthani children, trying to explain what Earth was like. The children were fascinated by her. Descriptions of oceans and forests, since their desert planet had neither. "Do all humans live near water?" asked a young Kelthani, whose name translated roughly to bright star. "Many of us do," Hayes said. "Water is very important for human life. We need to drink it and use it for growing food." An older Kelthani child named Swift Wind was examining Hayes's rifle with great curiosity. "Your weapons are very different from ours. They use physical projectiles instead of energy." "That's right. Sometimes the old ways work better than the new ways." Elder Morak Thel was working with Hayes to coordinate supplies and logistics. The arrival of 200 humans had changed all of their resource calculations, but it had also brought new possibilities. "Your people's food is very strange," Thel said, tasting a human energy bar. "But it has good nutrition. Our food might seem strange to you as well." Hayes tried a Kelthani nutrition cake and found it had a sweet, nutty flavor that was actually quite pleasant. "Not bad at all. We might be able to trade recipes if we survive this." "When we survive this," Thel corrected her. "I refuse to consider any other possibility." Sergeant Pete Collins was teaching Kelthani engineers how to make improvised explosives using materials from both human and alien technology. The Kelthani were quick learners and had some ideas that impressed even Collins. "Your chemical compounds are much more stable than ours," Collins said. "If we combine them with our detonation systems, we could make charges that are both powerful and safe to handle." The Kelthani engineer he was working with, whose name meant deep thinker, was excited about the possibilities. "We have been thinking of explosives as mining tools. You think of them as weapons. Together we might create something entirely new." As the day progressed, the two species continued to learn from each other and work together. Human practicality, combined with Kelthani innovation, was producing results that surprised everyone. Dr. Chen and Dr. Venth made a breakthrough in their study of Zephyrian biology. By analyzing the communication organs in dead Zephyrian warriors, they discovered that the aliens used specific pheromone frequencies to coordinate their actions. If we can generate interference on these frequencies, we might be able to disrupt their hive-mind communication, Chen explained to Morrison and Koss. "How long would it take to build such a device?" Koss asked. "With human electronics and Kelthani chemical knowledge, maybe 6 hours, Venth said. Morrison smiled. "Do it. Anything that confuses the enemy gives us an advantage." As evening approached, Captain Santos reported more disturbing news from her reconnaissance flights. "The hive ship is definitely coming." "It's massive, Colonel. I've never seen anything like it." Morrison gathered all of his squad leaders and the Kelthani military commanders for a final planning session. They had worked together for one day, but they would have to fight together like they had been allies for years. "Tomorrow will be the biggest battle any of us have ever fought," Morrison said. "But we have something the enemy doesn't expect. We have two different species working as one force. We have combined technologies and tactics that they have never seen before. And we have something to fight for that's worth any sacrifice." Commander Koss stood up and looked around the room at both human and Kelthani faces. 6 months ago, my people had given up hope. We thought we would die alone and forgotten. But you humans proved that we are not alone in the universe. You proved that some things are worth fighting for even when the fighters are strangers." "We're not strangers anymore," Morrison said. "We're brothers in arms." Outside, the night sky was filling with enemy ships as the Zephyrian fleet prepared for its final assault. But inside the colony, two species that had never met before were working together with a determination that would have surprised their enemies if they had understood what it meant. The humans had come to save the Kelthani, but in the process, both species were discovering something valuable about themselves and about the universe they shared. The final battle began at sunrise when the massive Zephyrian hive ship blotted out half the sky above Cathara. The ship was so large that it cast a shadow over the entire colony, and when its weapon ports opened, they looked like 1,000. Glowing eyes preparing to rain death on everything below. Colonel Jake Morrison stood on the colony's main defensive wall next to Commander Veltar Koss. watching as clouds of enemy warriors poured out of the hive ship like angry insects from a disturbed nest. Both commanders knew that this would be the battle that decided everything. "Are your people ready?" Morrison asked. "As ready as we can be," Koss replied. "The pheromone disruptors are in position, the shields are at maximum power, and every weapon we have is loaded and aimed." Morrison nodded and spoke into his radio. "All Marine units, this is Morrison. Today we find out what we're really made of. Remember your training, watch out for your buddies, and show these bugs what humans can do when we're fighting for something that matters." The first wave of attackers came down from the hive ship in living drop pods that looked like giant seeds. When they hit the ground and opened up, hundreds of Zephyrian warriors emerged from each one. But Dr. Sam Chen and Dr. Lyra Venth's pheromone disruptors immediately went to work, broadcasting interference signals that confused the alien hive mind. Instead of attacking in coordinated groups, the Zephyrian warriors stumbled around in confusion, bumping into each other and attacking empty air. It was the first time anyone had ever seen the aliens make mistakes in battle. "The disruptors are working," called out Corporal Lisa Hayes from her communications post. "Enemy coordination is breaking," down across the entire battlefield. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez was leading her squad in a desperate fight against a group of bioships that had landed near the colony's eastern gate. The ships were shooting streams of acid that could melt through almost anything, but Rodriguez had discovered that they were vulnerable to attacks from above. "Collins, I need you to get explosives on top of that big ship," she shouted over the noise of battle. Sergeant Pete Collins was already running toward the ship with a pack full of demolition charges. "Cover me for 30 seconds and I'll turn that thing into spare parts." Rodriguez and her Marines laid down suppressing fire while Collins climbed onto the bioship's back. The ship's defensive systems tried to stop him, but the alien weapons were designed to fight enemies on the ground, not Marines who were crazy enough to jump on top of them. Collins placed his charges on what looked like the ship's nerve centers and activated the timers. "Fire in the hole!" he yelled as he jumped off the ship and ran for cover. The explosion was so powerful that it shook the ground for kilometers in every direction. The bioship collapsed like a deflated balloon, and its death cry was so loud that it could be heard over all the other sounds of battle. Captain Maria Santos was flying her fighter through a sky filled with enemy aircraft, trying to reach the hive ship's communication array. Her mission was simple but almost impossible. Get close enough to plant a virus bomb that would disrupt the ship's central nervous system. "Morrison, this is Santos," she reported over the radio, while dodging acid blasts from enemy biofighters. "I'm making my approach run on the hive ship. It's going to be close." "Santos, if it's too dangerous, abort and try again later," Morrison replied. "Negative, Colonel. This is our best chance. The ship's defenses are focused on the ground battle. I might not get another opportunity like this." Santos pushed her fighter to maximum speed and aimed for the massive communication tower that rose from the center of the hive ship. Enemy fire was filling the air around her, and her ship's armor was taking hits that would have destroyed a less advanced aircraft. She managed to get within a few hundred meters of the tower before a direct hit from a biocannon sent her fighter spinning out of control. But Santos was one of the best pilots in the Marine Corps, and she managed to aim her crashing fighter directly at the communication array. The explosion when her fighter hit the tower was like a small nuclear blast. The entire hive ship shuddered and went dark for several seconds before emergency power came back online. But the damage was done. The ship's ability to coordinate the battle had been severely damaged. "Santos, report," Morrison called out on the radio, but there was no answer. On the ground, the battle was reaching its climax. The pheromone disruptors had caused chaos in the enemy ranks. but there were still hundreds of thousands of Zephyrian warriors attacking the colony from all directions. Human and Kelthani defenders were fighting side by side, their weapons creating a wall of fire that was holding the aliens back, but barely. Tech Sergeant Dan Murphy was in the shield generator complex with a team of Kelthani engineers trying to keep the defensive barriers operational while enemy acid ate through the equipment faster than they could repair it. "The eastern generator is overloading," called out Voreth, the Kelthani engineer. "If it fails, that entire section of the wall will be unprotected." Murphy was working with tools in both hands, rewiring control circuits while sweat poured down his face. "I can give you maybe 10 more minutes, but then we need to fall back to the secondary positions." Elder Morak Thel was coordinating the evacuation of civilians to the deep mining tunnels, but he was also preparing a desperate final gambit. Hidden throughout the colony were mining charges that had been placed for excavation work before the war started. If the defenses failed completely, Thel was prepared to detonate those charges and take as many enemies as possible with them. Dr. Lyraventh was treating wounded soldiers from both species in a medical station that was getting closer and closer to the front lines as the battle progressed. She had given up trying to count how many people she had saved, focusing instead on keeping her hands steady and her mind clear. "Doctor, we need to evacuate the medical station," called out a human medic. "The fighting is getting too close." "5 more minutes," Venth replied, without looking up from the wounded Marine she was treating. "This soldier will die if I stop now." The Marine looked up at her with grateful eyes. "Thanks, Doc. I owe you one." "You owe me nothing," Venth said. "We are all fighting for the same thing." As the battle raged on, it became clear that both sides were reaching their limits. The human and Kelthani forces had fought with incredible courage and skill, but they were running out of ammunition and energy. The Zephyrian forces had suffered massive casualties and confusion from the pheromone disruptors, but they still had overwhelming numbers. Morrison and Koss were in the command bunker, watching their tactical displays show enemy forces getting closer and closer to breakthrough positions. "We've done everything we can," Koss said, "but there are just too many of them." Morrison was about to agree when Hayes called out from her communications station. "Colonel, I'm picking up a massive energy buildup from the mining tunnels. It looks like Elder Thel is preparing to detonate the excavation charges." Morrison grabbed his radio. "Thel, this is Morrison. Do not detonate those charges. We still have people fighting out here." Thel's voice came back over the radio, calm and determined. "Colonel Morrison, it has been an honor to fight alongside your people, but this is the only way to stop them from taking the colony and using it as a base to attack other worlds." Thel, "Wait! Give us 5 more minutes! I cannot wait any longer! The eastern wall has fallen, and they are breaking through in 3 places. It is time." Morrison looked at Koss, and both commanders understood what was about to happen. Thel was going to sacrifice himself and the colony to deny it to the enemy. "All units, this is Morrison," he called out on the radio. "Immediate withdrawal to minimum safe distance. The colony is about to be destroyed." But before anyone could move, the ground began to shake with a series of explosions that started at the eastern wall and spread outward like ripples in a pond. Thel had detonated the mining charges in a carefully planned sequence that created artificial earthquakes under the main concentrations of enemy forces. Thousands of Zephyrian warriors disappeared into cracks in the ground that opened up beneath them. Bioships that had landed near the colony were swallowed by sinkholes that appeared in seconds. Even the massive hive ship was affected, tilting dangerously as the ground beneath it shifted and cracked. The explosions continued for several minutes, reshaping the landscape around the colony and eliminating most of the attacking force. When the dust finally settled, the battlefield was quiet except for the groaning of damaged bioships and the occasional sound of falling rocks. Morrison and his Marines had survived by taking cover behind the colony's walls, but they knew that Thel and many others had not been so lucky. The Elder had sacrificed himself to save everyone else, timing the explosions perfectly to destroy the enemy while giving the defenders a chance to survive. The Hive ship's commander, Hive Queen Zaxth, found herself facing the first major defeat in Zephyrian military history. Her massive invasion force had been destroyed by a combination of human tactics, Kelthani determination, and strategic thinking that she had never encountered before. "Retreat," she ordered her remaining forces. "This world is no longer worth the cost." As the surviving Zephyrian ships lifted off and disappeared into space, Morrison and Koss stood together among the ruins of the colony they had fought so hard to defend. "We won," Koss said, but his voice was sad rather than triumphant. "Yes," Morrison agreed, "but victory always costs something." 3 months later, the colony of Kithara had been rebuilt with human engineering and Kelthani technology working together. The new defensive systems were stronger than anything either species had built before, and a permanent garrison of human Marines was stationed there to help train Kelthani defenders. A memorial wall near the center of the colony listed the names of everyone who had died in the battle, human and Kelthani names carved together in stone. Morrison stood in front of the wall every morning, reading the names and remembering the people who had made the ultimate sacrifice for freedom. Dr. Venth and Dr. Chen had established a joint research facility where both species could study alien biology and develop new technologies together. Commander Koss now wore the honorary rank of Terran Marine Colonel and was traveling to other Kelthani worlds to teach them how to defend themselves. Morrison received a message from Earth that 17 other alien species had requested human military assistance after learning about the Battle of Velos Prime. As he prepared to brief his Marines for their next deployment, he thought about how the universe had become a much more interesting and dangerous place. But he also thought about how humans had proven something important to themselves and to the galaxy. They had shown that some things were worth fighting for, even when the people you were fighting for were complete strangers. They had shown that courage and determination could overcome impossible odds when people worked together. As new drop, pods were loaded aboard the UES Defiance for the next mission. Morrison looked up at the stars and wondered how many other worlds were out there, hoping to see meteor showers that meant help was coming.